So 1 second. Here you go.
Awesome. Well, happy Friday, everyone. Thank you all for hopping on the line today. And we are so excited about our guest today, Dr. Leigh. Dr. Leigh, well, we can say welcome back, as Adrian said. You joined us for our event in September last year. So we're excited to have you share what you shared with us. Dr. Leigh is an animal physiologist, and I'm going to let her explain all of that fun stuff to you. But I'm really excited about hearing about what her exciting career is all about. So everyone ready? Awesome. Take it away, Dr. Leigh.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'll go ahead and just take 1 second to share my screen. Oh, let's see. Oops. Here, let me see if I can do that again. Okay, can everyone see my slides okay? Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me back, technically. I'm an assistant professor at California State University, Dominguez Hills. And as a professor of biology, mainly animal physiology, I do a lot of different things. So I do research, I teach, I advise and mentor students. I also do a fair amount of writing, applying for grants and writing published papers on my work. I serve on various committees, so I do lots of different things. But today I'll mainly focus on kind of how I got to this point in my career, and also what my research recently has been focusing on. So starting with how I got here, it goes way back. This is actually a paper that, luckily enough, my mom saved from when I was in the 3rd grade. And I had the opportunity to interview a professional in a career that I was interested in. And at the time, and still to this day, I loved the ocean. So I wanted to interview a marine biologist. And here's what some of my interview questions looked like. So from that conversation on with that marine scientist, I was hooked. I knew that that's kind of what I wanted to focus on in my career, but I didn't really know how to go about doing that. So in high school, I volunteered at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. I am originally from Maryland. And then I went on to get my undergraduate degree, or my bachelor's degree, in marine science from Coastal Carolina University, which is a smaller university in South Carolina. And I also minored in environmental science. So that was kind of the main focus. I learned obviously a lot in all of the classes that I took, but I knew that if I wanted to go into research, that I would need to get some actual experience doing research. So I did a few different things. First, I applied and ended up getting accepted to this leadership program at my university. And as part of that leadership program, we were required to do a 6-month internship in the area that we were hoping to get a job in after we graduated. So I ended up coming out here to California for that internship, and stayed for 6 months on Catalina Island at the Wrigley Center for Environmental Studies. And that was really my first exposure to scientific research. I had to develop a research question, develop hypotheses, come up with an experiment, test those hypotheses. So it was a really awesome experience. And I also started to kind of get my introduction to presenting about scientific work and writing about scientific work. So it was really useful to get that hands-on experience. I got a lot of work in the field, actually working with marine life in that little cove there. That's Big Fisherman's Cove on Catalina Island. And also in the lab. So learning a lot of different techniques that one might use when doing experiments in the lab. Once I graduated from Coastal, I ended up coming back out to California. I was also hooked on living in California, and worked at an organization that is now located in Costa Mesa called SQUIRP, or the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. And I worked there as a research technician. I wasn't really entirely sure what I could do with my marine science degree at that time, even though I had had that amazing internship. I wasn't sure what avenue of marine science I wanted to go into. So working at SQUIRP, it was a water quality research lab. So I was testing water in different outflows into the ocean, seeing what type of bacteria and contaminants might be there. And it was really, really interesting work. I learned a lot of really great lab techniques and water sampling techniques, but it wasn't exactly, what I was hoping to kind of study long term. So then I took a position as a research tech again, back on the East Coast at the University of Georgia. And there I was working in a zebrafish lab that was studying immunology. So they were studying kind of different congenital diseases using the fish as a model. So I was really interested in kind of the like husbandry and care and use of the fish. And they were more kind of focused on like human immunity to different things. So again, great experience, not exactly what I was hoping to do long term. So finally, I decided I need to go to graduate school. I need to get more research experience. I want to, at this point, probably eventually work at a university. And a lot of times to be a professor at a university, especially a four-year university, a PhD is required. So I was like, okay, now I kind of have a game plan. I want to get my PhD. I want to probably teach at some point at a university, and I want to keep doing marine research. So I found an advisor at University of California, Irvine, that was focused on nutritional physiology. So really interested in what animals eat and how they process those foods, and worked in mostly marine systems. So he's worked with lots of different types of fish before. So it seemed like a really good fit. And I'll talk about some of the research I did there today. But once I graduated from UCI, I did what's called a postdoc position. So a postdoc position is essentially you have your PhD, you're able to kind of do research projects mainly independently on your own, but you're not quite faculty yet. You don't have your own research lab, but you might be teaching classes. So it's kind of like this in-between position before you go for that professor position. And I'll talk about some of the work that I did there as well today. And then from there, I finally in 2020 got my position at Cal State Dominguez Hills. So I'm still relatively new there, but it has been a great experience working with lots of great students. So I'll talk about kind of a couple of my recent research and kind of how it's all tied together. So my area of expertise is focused on what fishes eat and how they process the food that they eat. So what an animal consumes, I would argue, is actually one of the most intimate interactions that it can have with its environment, because it's taking something from its environment, putting it inside its body, breaking it down, and then even returning some of those components back to the environment. And the efficiency with which they do this is actually really, really important, because they need to have energy to be able to move, to be able to grow and reproduce, and so on and so forth. So they really need to have all of their body systems functioning properly, and they need nutrients and energy in order to do that. Fishes actually represent really great systems to study questions related to nutrition and digestion, because they are an extremely diverse group of vertebrates, one of the most diverse group of vertebrates on the planet. There's over 34,000 different species of fish on Earth, and we are discovering more and more every year. So there's lots of fish, lots of different, as you would imagine, diet types that they eat. If you can imagine it, there's probably a fish out there that eats it. There's fish that eat algae. There's fish that eat wood, like that catfish in the center picture there. Fish that eat large marine mammals, fish that eat teeny tiny microscopic plankton or bacteria, fish that only feed on blood, everything in between. They eat a lot of different things. So obviously, what fish eat is kind of important for us humans as well. And this is because we depend on fish as a food source and as an economic resource. So to kind of put that in perspective, in California alone, over 120,000 people are employed by the seafood industry. It brings in over $200 million per year to the state's economy. And kind of on a global scale, over 3.3 million people depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. So it's really important that we understand how fish fit into marine ecosystems and their dynamics. Sharks are of particular interest to me because they're thought to be apex predators. So they're really controlling ecosystems from the top down. And when you probably think of sharks, you probably think of these really powerful predators that really only eat meat. And thanks to lots of different movies, past and present, sharks can get kind of a bad reputation for even hunting humans. But I can assure you that sharks do not want humans on their menu. But they do have a really diverse diet. They actually eat a lot of different things, everything from large marine mammals, like on that previous slide, all the way down to microscopic plankton, the tiniest organisms in the ocean. But there is actually at least one really unique shark that not only eats these really high protein and high fat food sources, but also eats seagrass. So the bonnethead shark is a small member of the hammerhead family. It only reaches about 3 feet in length, and it consumes a diet of up to 62% seagrass. So this completely kind of threw a wrench into everything we thought we knew about sharks being strict carnivores. We have never really known of a shark that eats this much vegetation before. So this would mean that the bonnethead is not really acting like that apex predator that we thought all sharks to be, but more like an omnivore that's consuming a mix of seagrass and small crustaceans and other invertebrates, things like shrimp and squid, things like that. So it really kind of caused me to want to reevaluate the role that this particular shark species is having in its environment. So I decided to investigate these bonnethead sharks a little bit further to figure out if they can actually get nutrients from all of this seagrass material, since they're kind of supposed to be these carnivores. So are they really getting nutrients, or are they just kind of passing all of this grass through their digestive system? So I took a very small boat, probably too small for those of you who have seen Jaws, but took a small little boat out into the waters of the Florida Keys, where there are millions of individual bonnethead sharks, in addition to lots of other shark species like bull sharks, tiger sharks, various reef sharks, nurse sharks, lemon sharks, all sorts of different sharks live in the Florida Key area. But we were looking for bonnetheads. Whenever we got to kind of a spot that looked like bonnetheads might like, they tend to live in really shallow water. These people in the picture are actually standing up and kind of walking between the boat, which is here where this cameraman is, and the shoreline, which is where those mangrove trees are. So we would walk this really long gill net out perpendicular to the shore in these really shallow waters. We would throw some chum in the water and then just kind of wait. And the water was shallow enough that if something got caught in the net, we would usually see, disturbance in the water, some sort of splashing. At the time, this was a really small project. It was essentially me and just a handful of other people. And since this was my PhD dissertation project, usually I was the one that was nominated to jump into these shark-infested waters to get the bonnethead out of the net, and just praying the whole time that it was in fact a bonnethead that we caught and not something much bigger. Luckily, it usually was a bonnethead shark that we had caught. So we would detangle these sharks from the net, bring them back to the boat. We would have a really big live well on the boat filled with seawater, kind of fresh seawater coming in, where we could keep these sharks until we were ready to bring them all back to the lab. Once we brought these sharks back to the lab, we brought them to this outdoor lab facility with these really big tanks, and we did feeding trials with them. So I fed the sharks a diet of 90% seagrass and 10% squid. So you can kind of think of like little reverse sushi rolls with this bundle of seagrass wrapped in some squid, and that's what the shark is eating here. The sharks had no problem eating a ton of this diet. They would gobble it right up happily every day. So a couple of things that we were measuring during this feeding trial. We would take blood samples from the sharks every week or so, and we would use those later on to try to figure out if nutrients from the seagrass was actually making its way into the sharks' blood and other tissues. We would also take fecal material samples every day after the shark ate. So yes, we're collecting lots of shark poop. Very glamorous job. But it was actually really important because we needed that poop to be able to figure out exactly what the shark was retaining from its diet. So we knew exactly how much we were feeding the shark. We knew exactly what they were excreting. So we could kind of tell, using a very simple calculation, what types of nutrients they were actually retaining and using for their energetic purposes. And actually from this work, we did figure out that the sharks are assimilating or like actually retaining a lot of the nutrients from seagrass. And they were doing so like very similar concentrations to what sea turtles do. And sea turtles are very much herbivorous, especially as juveniles. They become a little bit more omnivorous as they kind of mature. But they are, on par with these sea turtles, which eat a ton of seagrass. And this is a shark, something that's supposed to be a carnivore and only be able to process meat. But they're really doing a very good job at digesting seagrass. So the next question I had was how? How might these sharks be capable of digesting so much plant material if they're supposed to be these strict carnivores? Well, to look at this, all sharks have a really unique piece of their digestive system called a spiral intestine, and it quite literally looks like a spiral staircase. These images here are some CT scanned images of shark spiral intestines that I took using specimens from the Natural History Museum in LA. And you can kind of clearly see, just based on the structure or the shape of their intestine, how food would have to move really slowly through this region of the gut. It would just constantly be getting kind of stuck on all of those little tissue pieces running through the center of the gut, as opposed to our digestive system, which you've ever seen a picture of it, is just kind of like a straight tube. It runs, all over the place throughout kind of our abdomen area, but it's just a straight tube. There's no like obstructions or valves in between throughout our intestine. So these sharks are really good at slowing down the food through their gut. So the reason that this is kind of important to note is because it allows a lot more time for them to break down that seagrass, which is really fibrous. And it allows lots of little nooks and crannies for gut bacteria or microbes to live in. So they have a ton of gut microbes in their gut. You and I also have a ton of gut microbes in our guts. But the sharks have this really ideal intestine where these microbes would just love to live and help them break up that seagrass material. And you can kind of see that also here. So this is a cross section as if you're looking down a shark intestine, which hopefully you never will have to do. Hopefully this is as close as you get to that. But you can see all of those little grooves kind of throughout the tissue on the side. And that's where those microbes are going to just love to live. So in short, the microbes that help with seagrass digestion would likely be found in the spiral intestine. And we did some like DNA sequencing techniques to figure that out and show that there are microbes there that are helping them break down the seagrass material. So what does this mean? So why is this important to know what sharks are eating and how is it important to us humans? So I mentioned that as top predators, sharks are directly impacting the ecosystems that we depend on for food and economic resources. So if we can understand sharks' roles in ecosystems, then we can help conserve the ecosystems through sustainable fisheries management, through shark conservation, and habitat conservation policies. Unfortunately, shark populations are undergoing a really rapid decline. Since 1970, so just over 50 years, experts have found that the global abundance of oceanic sharks has declined by over 70%, 70% in the last 50 years. And sharks existed before dinosaurs even. So there's something really, really bad happening right now for the sharks, that their populations are declining so quickly. We know that declining shark populations can have a negative effect on ecosystems and on fisheries, but without kind of further research like this, we really won't begin to understand how critical they are to ecosystems such as seagrass meadows where bonnethead shark lives, for example. So of course, there are lots of different confounding reasons why shark populations are declining, but there is kind of one in particular that my current research is focusing on. So unfortunately, not everything out in the ocean that animals are going to have access to eat is actually food these days. So some of my research now is focused on how marine animals are able to deal with microplastics that they might encounter in the ocean. So first off, how are microplastics getting into the ocean in the first place? So one option is that big macroplastics like water bottles, tires, forgotten fishing nets, etc., are degrading over time from weathering and sun damage, and they create these teeny, teeny, tiny pieces. There are also microplastic fibers that come off of synthetic clothing whenever we put them through the wash. And there are some plastics that are manufactured to be small. So a lot of these are banned now, but in some areas you can still get cosmetic materials like face washes that have microbeads in them that initially were plastic. A lot of them try to be biodegradable now. Or things like glitter. Unfortunately, I know it's so much fun to work with glitter, but that is a microplastic that can eventually end up in the oceans and in the waterways. So all of these very small fibers and particles can find their way through water treatment, through stormwater runoff, and into our waterways. There was actually some previous work done in San Francisco Bay that found that 7 trillion microplastic fibers from tire particles are kind of washed away each year into San Francisco Bay. Unfortunately, that means that these plastics are entrapping organisms as well as being ingested by them. So even in organisms as small as these plankton, these are some plankton called copepods that I collected off the coast of Catalina Island. And I just collected these, what was it, last year, so not too long ago. But you can see this microplastic fiber kind of wrapped around the outside of this plankton. And then over here, we can actually see a plastic particle that was ingested by these teeny tiny plankton. So I really want to figure out how pervasive microplastics are in the ocean environment, where we might find them, as well as what adverse or kind of bad effects they could be causing. So my students and I have collected water samples, plankton samples, as well as some tissue samples from 2 commercially fished species, anchovies and the California halibut. And we looked at samples from 4 different habitat types in Southern California. So we looked in LA Harbor, we looked in off the coast of Palos Verdes, right in the middle of the San Pedro Channel, and then all the way on the west side of Catalina Island. So if we're finding microplastics in some of these organisms, it could mean that, these plastics are causing some adverse effects. So some things that they could cause are like blocked and damaged digestive tracts, leaching plastic toxicants that could cause disruption to some of their different body systems, introducing foreign microorganisms that could live on the plastic. And all of these things could cause growth deficits, reproductive issues for these organisms, and decreased lifespan for them. So we went to each of these sites and first collected water samples using a submersible pump. And we mainly focused on surface waters at this point. So definitely one of the things I want to do in the future is kind of look at different areas throughout the water column, getting deeper and deeper into the ocean and see if we see different types or different quantities of plastics. Then we did some plankton trawls. So this is our boat here. This is Catalina Island here. And right here, you can kind of see 2 plankton tows, which are towing behind the boat to collect a bunch of plankton. We would bring all those samples back to the lab and do some sorting. So we would filter the water through these different sizes so that we could get at what different size plastic particles might be the main problem. So that's the size fractionation. And this is kind of what that process looks like. So we have this kind of vacuum setup attached to this beaker here. We have this little filter funnel with this filter on top of it, and we kind of wash or backwash these larger sieves that should supposedly have the plastics on them. And so the plastics will end up on this filter and all of the water will just rush through to be disposed of. So then you're left with this kind of filter with all of these microplastic particles on it. And then from there, we do some visual counts. So we put that filter on a microscope slide, we look under a microscope, and we literally count the number of plastics that we see. And here's an example of what you might see when looking at these filters. So the kind of black and white speckled background is just the texture of the filter. And then on the left, there's a very bright blue microplastic fiber. And then on the right, there is a microplastic particle. And a lot of this work was actually done by 3 undergraduate students in my lab. So Kelsey, Kevin, and Raven spent a lot of time photographing, counting, and analyzing all of this data. Unfortunately, we found microplastics in every single sample from every single location, every single tissue type that we looked at. So it is everywhere out there. This is a map that was created by master student Chelsea Bowers. And essentially what it's showing is the different size classes of plastics that we found in each location for the water and the plankton samples. So you can see that there are, even though some of them are kind of smaller, there are plastics of pretty much every size, both fibers and particles in all the locations that we looked at. So from this kind of data, we were able to figure out that LA Harbor alone contains about 275,000 microplastics per meter squared of surface water. So to kind of put that in perspective, it's more than double what global estimates are for surface waters. So LA Harbor in particular has seemingly a lot of plastic contamination, more so than what was found in San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, Great Lakes, even some ports in China and India we compared to. So lots of plastic pollution going in there that we definitely need to address. We also showed that the types of kind of size class that the plankton are going to be ingesting are very similar, might not be a surprise, to the size food that they would eat. So kind of targeting specifically that range of size of plastics will be kind of important in trying to prevent that from getting into the food web. So currently, some of the things that we're doing with this work is using a technique called FTIR, which essentially is a fancy word for figuring out what type of plastic you have. So we can figure out if the plastic that we're finding is coming from styrofoam or from like PVC piping or from fibers from clothing or from tires, so on and so forth. So we can really start to figure out what the source, what the really big problem source is for these microplastics. I mentioned we collected tissues from anchovies and halibut, so we're starting to go through a lot of that data actually right now when we are finding kind of plastics throughout. And then another thing that we have going on is my other master student, Will, is using zebrafish as a model organism to now test what we learned the plastic kind of pervasiveness or what the concentrations of plastic are in the wild. He's using that information to then design really biologically relevant experiments in the lab where we're exposing zebrafish to concentrations that we found out in LA Harbor, for example, and seeing how it affects their growth over time and their ability to reproduce, how it affects their digestive health and their microbiome and all sorts of different things. So then what's the solution? So microplastics is kind of sometimes a doom and gloom subject a little bit, but unfortunately it's there. We have to address it and we have to figure out what we can do about it. So there's lots of different solutions that we can kind of do to help prevent microplastic pollution in the first place. So first would be instituting more sustainable fishing practices or really enforcing the regulations that do already exist. Also, encouraging local officials to support healthy environmental solutions, preventing microplastic pollution from making its way into the water in the first place. So really trying to avoid single-use plastics when possible, because usually those are the ones that are going to degrade the fastest and are used the most often. This has actually become a much bigger problem since COVID has started in 2020 because of all the PPE that people are using, which of course is necessary to, protect ourselves. But the disposal of those, I think, is the main problem. You might often see, gloves or masks kind of discarded on the streets and sidewalks, and that has been causing a lot of potential pollution as well. So really the choices that we make every day are going to be impacting what is making its way into the oceans. So just kind of something to think about in terms of kind of what you can do in your daily life to kind of help prevent plastic pollution in the first place. So today I've kind of just scratched the surface of the type of research that I have going on in my lab. Of course, there are tons of other professors at Dominguez Hills and other local universities that do a lot of other different types of exciting research, some also related to marine science. But I'll just leave, I guess, with a kind of couple pieces of advice for people who are interested in careers in STEM. So first, as you kind of probably noted from when I was giving my introduction and how I got to where I am, my route was not very direct. It was very circuitous. I was, research tech at various places, kind of dipped my toe in a lot of different types of research projects. And I'm really glad that I did that because it helped kind of lead me to the type of research that I was really interested in. It helped me figure out maybe what I might not be as interested in. But even from, my jobs at SQUIRP and from University of Georgia and my internship, I learned a lot of important techniques that I still use today in the field, in the lab, and even in analyzing data. So all good experiences. So definitely kind of try out a bunch of different things until you find something that you really love. My second kind of piece of advice would be to find really good mentors. I was really lucky throughout my kind of journey to where I am now. I had a lot of great professors and scientists who I reached out to ask questions. No one in my family had pursued a career in science before. No one in my family had, gone past a college degree before. So they didn't really know, what grad school was or how to apply. I didn't really know. So I really relied on mentors and other scientists and professors to kind of help guide me. And that was really, really useful. And then lastly, just as you're kind of thinking about what you want to do long term, choose a career that you like really, really love, but that also allows you to be the other parts of you that you might really love. So I'm a mom, I have 2 kids. I was talking about that kind of in the beginning. I have a baby, he's 6 months old, and a 3.5-year-old as well. And I'm actually taking them with me up to Friday Harbor, Washington this summer on a month-long research trip with my husband as well, who's coming with us. And I'll be kind of collecting different fish samples all the way up the coast to Washington. We're going to live on an island off the coast of Washington for a couple weeks, doing some research. So I'm really grateful that my job now kind of allows me to do my research and have my family kind of come along with me. And of course, I have lots of other interests too that, I feel really good about pursuing, like cooking and just, getting exercise and all the things that kind of make me happy I'm able to do with the job that I have now. So as you're kind of thinking about what job you want, just know that it's not, the only thing that should be on your mind. You should be thinking about all the things that you kind of like to do, and try to choose something that allows you to do all of those things. But yeah, so that's it for me. I would love to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Put it in the chat also, and then she can read, or you can unmute at this time. I know you guys have some. I always wait for last before I ask them, so I give the students a chance. You got anything, Isabel? Your face is inquisitive.
So you talked about how your route was kind of windy to get to where you are now. Any programs or things you would recommend we be a part of, like internships, like at specific places or something like that, to help us discover what we would like if we want to pursue a route in the science field?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I mean, very, very early on for me, like I mentioned, one of the first things I did was I volunteered at the aquarium in Baltimore where I lived. So that's a good way to get involved. I know we have the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach that is always looking for great volunteers. They have a program, and I'll have to maybe find the link and send it to you all after the fact, but there is a specific like teen science program that they have at the aquarium. I actually spoke to them before as well. So I know that you can get involved kind of volunteering and, just learning from the people at the aquarium pretty early. Also, a lot of the state parks have programs that students can get involved in. So like Crystal Cove State Park is one that comes to mind that does a lot of really good kind of educational outreach. I know actually the Wrigley Center at Catalina Island has a program over the summer that, kind of young teens can do with their families, where like you come out to the island for the day and they kind of show you the type of work they have going on. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities out there. Also, I mean, a lot of research locally happens at universities, and we have a ton of different universities, luckily, kind of in the Southern California area. So it's a little bit harder to kind of get involved, as young as some of you may be, but kind of once you get into high school, a lot of them love high school volunteers. Oh yeah, Parks and Rec Services definitely is a good one to get involved in. Trying to think what else. I think those are kind of some of the big ones. There's the Ocean Institute, which is great. Oh yeah, there are, nature clubs. I think that's kind of, there's lots of different opportunities for sure. Good question.
Okay, the chat, I believe can you see the chat?
Yes.
Okay, Mary has a question there at the top.
Okay. What made it clear for you on what you studied that led you to where you are now? And how did you merge the two sides of yourself and your interests? Good question. So I guess so as I was kind of figuring out exactly what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study, I did a lot of reading. So lots of reading of kind of what was already known about sharks, what was already known about different fish species, and tried to figure out kind of the gaps of what we didn't know yet, or questions that I had that I couldn't find the answers to. And kind of thinking about, I was really interested in sharks. I just thought they were really fascinating. But it was really interesting to me how little we knew about sharks, and they're literally the biggest fish in the ocean, and we knew so little about them. And we're still discovering new species of sharks all the time. There was one discovered, just this past year. So there are these big fish out there that we know very little about, and I wanted to learn more about them. So thinking about kind of what they ate and how they processed that food made sense to me, because then that tied it back to how they're interacting with their ecosystem, and that affects us as well because we're part of the ecosystem too. Does that kind of answer your question, Mary?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm reading and didn't have my mic off mute. It's Daniel wants to know, what is the most interesting marine life you've encountered?
That is a good question. So a while ago, I think it was probably a year ago now or so, maybe even more than that. I don't know if any of you heard, but in Crystal Cove, when that football fish washed up on the shore, have you seen pictures of that? Or an anglerfish is another name for it. You guys hear about that? It's that fish. I don't know. Have you seen Finding Nemo, the like scary fish that has the little like glow thing that hangs over its head and the really big teeth?
Yeah.
So one of those washed up in Crystal Cove, and it's really, really rare to find one that washes up because they live in like the really, really deep ocean. So usually if it dies, by the time it kind of gets washed up, you can't really tell what it is. But this one was like really intact. And it's at the Museum of Natural History now. And I wasn't there when they found it, but I did get to go to the Natural History Museum while they were like identifying it and kind of preserving it and putting it into the exhibit. And I got to see that, which was really cool. As far as most interesting thing I've interacted kind of out in the field that was alive, probably whale sharks, which are the actual biggest fish in the ocean, and eat microscopic plankton. But I got to see some of those in La Paz, Mexico. They usually kind of hang out there in the like winter months because it's nice and warm. So I got to see some of them, and they are very, very big, especially when you're in the water with them. You're very aware of how big they are, but it was really cool to see them just filtering tons of water over their mouth and their gills and collecting all the plankton. So they were pretty cool too. And then I got a question direct to me. What was the most surprising discovery you've been a part of? Oh, so probably the anglerfish one. I kind of answered that question too. That was pretty cool. And also just the bonnet head sharks being omnivores was pretty exciting too, because they're the only shark that we know of that does that. So that was pretty big news. I was actually on maternity leave with my first daughter when that story came out, and I was just on the phone round the clock with reporters from Germany and London and New York and here in LA, just wanting to learn about this weird omnivorous shark. So that was pretty exciting too.
Where would you say that anglerfish came from? Because usually depths that like those ugly fish like that, they're usually like near the Mariana Trench or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big mysteries that honestly we don't exactly know. And that's the second one that has been found kind of like that within the last couple of years. But usually it doesn't normally happen. So yeah, I wish I could answer that question, but I don't know. I don't know how it was possible, because even just like the pressure of coming up from that deep usually kind of ruins the organism. So yeah, it's pretty amazing that it was so intact and is in such great shape.
Wow. Have you seen I was trying to study some of the stuff you do, and have you ever run into like a cyclops shark?
No, I've seen pictures of them, but I never have actually seen one in person myself. Yeah, they're pretty funky looking.
Yeah. And they look like they have human eyes, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. Yeah, they're very bizarre looking. Yeah, sharks come in all, I mean, everyone kind of thinks of the stereotypical like great white or even the great hammerhead, but there are tons of different species of shark. I think there's over 550 species of sharks, all very different.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And then I got the question, do you have to be good at math? So math, if I'm being honest, was my worst subject, like in school through college. I think my worst grade was in calculus. So I wasn't particularly good in math in school, but I do use math kind of a lot now. But it's very specialized to kind of exactly what I'm studying. I do a lot of statistics. So even if you're not like great at math right now, it does make a difference, I think, if you're doing math to answer a question that you're really excited about. So if I have to do math to figure out, how much bonnet head sharks are eating or what they're getting from their diet, like that's math that's interesting to me, and I'll figure it out. So don't be discouraged if you're not, super great at math right now.
That's always good to know. And as far as the female representation in your field, how does that look?
So I would say out of all the kind of STEM fields, marine science is a little bit more evenly split male, female. That being said, if you kind of dive a little deeper into marine scientists that study sharks, that is very male dominated, but that is kind of shifting now as well. hopefully you'll notice, I don't know if any of you watch like Shark Week on the Discovery Channel. A lot of times historically it's been like white male scientists that they feature, and that's really shifting a lot now. There's a lot more women that are being featured, lots more people of color being featured, so definitely the tides are turning. I think it's kind of a really exciting time to be in shark science in particular.
But we love Shark Week, by the way.
Oh yeah.
And to get to Shark Week, me and my daughter watch all the Sharknado movies. Then we get in, then we get into Shark Week. And I was
That's so
going to say,
funny.
don't tell anybody, but I already did because we're recording this, right? So,
That's funny. I've never actually seen the Sharknado movies,
oh my
but I'm sure they are hilarious.
you have to have a really good sense of humor, really.
Yeah, I bet.
And just need a laugh.
Mhm.
Anybody have any more questions for Dr. Leigh? I think somebody, Jackie wanted to know what the reproductive rate of shrimp was.
Oh, I am not entirely sure. I don't know off the top of my head. That is something that obviously so we eat shrimp, lots of different fish and shark species eat a shrimp, so they're very important to the food web. I'm not sure exactly, what their reproductive rate is, though. I wish I could answer that question. Sorry.
And for those of you who don't know where Crystal Cove is, the ones in California, it's in Laguna Beach. It's like one of my favorite places. I used to work out there, and I would that would like be my place to go where the crowds aren't. They're not bombarding that place as much.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any questions? So what was the scariest thing that has happened to you out there?
So in Florida, they are very prone to getting very random like thunderstorms and lightning storms. And I happen to be collecting these sharks kind of in like prime hurricane season as well, because that's when the sharks are actually reproducing, and we were hoping to get juvenile sharks. So I was in Florida in the Keys during hurricane season, out in the field trying to catch sharks. And we saw kind of like lightning way off in the distance from where we were. And it started getting closer and closer. And we saw a water spout, which I had never seen before, but it is literally a tornado of water that like comes up out of the ocean and into the air. And that was coming at us, but we had just caught a shark in the net. So I was like trying to detangle the shark as quickly as I could, get it back on the boat so we could like get out of there and get out of the water. And we made it, everything was fine, but it was like very scary.
I can imagine. And I've seen those water spouts in the ocean. So
they're crazy.
yeah, the ocean is unpredictable. So
yeah, I wanted no part of that.
yeah, I know. all of your 9 lives started adding up right there. And I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
seriously.
not today.
Yes.
So anybody else have any questions for Dr. Leigh? Which shark do you do your research on the most? Is it the great white or?
No, so I'd say probably the bonnethead shark is the one that I have worked with the most. I have done work with some other species like dogfish, which is a shark species, the 6-gill shark, which is another kind of like big, usually kind of more deep sea shark. When I was doing some of that spiral intestine work, I worked with a lot of the shark specimens they have at the Natural History Museum, and worked with lantern sharks, which are sharks that actually bioluminesce a little bit. So that means they kind of like glow in the dark. They have this bacteria that is all over them that helps them glow. So those are pretty cool. This one, unfortunately, was in the museum, so it was not glowing for us as it would in real life, but they are very cool. What other sharks have I worked with? I'm trying to think of other cool ones. So locally, we have a lot of leopard sharks. I've worked with them before. You may have even seen them if you've gone swimming before. We might see a lot of leopard sharks or horn sharks or swell sharks. Those are all local sharks that I've worked with before. So lots of different kinds. My favorite's probably the bonnethead, though. I definitely have a sweet spot for them since I worked with them for 5 years during my PhD.
That's nice. That's a pretty cool looking shark too. I hadn't I've never heard of one until you mentioned it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and one thing I'll note too that a lot of people might not know about getting a PhD. So when you go to like get your undergraduate degree, you pay tuition, right? So you pay for classes, master's degree, kind of the same way. But a PhD is different. You don't actually pay any tuition at all. Usually you actually get paid as a researcher and as a instructor to teach some of their lab classes. So unlike going to like medical school, which again is like tons of tuition, going to get your PhD, you actually get paid. It's not usually, you don't usually get paid a lot, but you're not, having to pay more tuition. And another thing a lot of people might not realize is you might think you have to go from your bachelor's degree to your master's degree and then your PhD, but that's actually not the case. You can go straight from a bachelor's degree into a PhD program if you want. My PhD program happened to be a dual program, so you could get both master's and PhD at the same time. But not all programs are like that.
Well, that's interesting to know.
Yeah.
I want to say Raya. I think that's it. He says, how is that possible?
The tuition or skipping the master's degree? I guess for the tuition part, they, assume that you are actually, skipping the master's. Okay. So yeah, it's just not, it's like a totally different degree that will get you a totally different type of job. So generally a master's degree is great if you want to teach at a 2-year college, if you are going to go like into an industry or work for the government or do some sort of like environmental evaluation, things like that. So it's kind of a different career that you're going after if you want to get a master's. If you want to do something like I do and work at a 4-year university where I teach classes and kind of run my own research lab, that is something that you would need a PhD for. So I guess, a lot of people do get a master's and then a PhD, and that's great, but you don't necessarily have to. Yeah.
That's good to know. Isabel says, yep. All right. Any other questions? These are good questions. All right. So, Dr. Leigh, the next time, I hope you can come again because we're trying to do our Girls in Future Technologies event again.
Oh, excellent.
We're actually working with the high school and the elementary school, because I think the younger they are, the quicker we catch them and get them interested, the better off we are. Because, by high school, I think they kind of made up their minds. Either they don't want to do something or they do, right? So, the 5th grade. So the principal at the elementary school and the high school right across the street, you probably saw it from the middle school that we were at. They're interested as well. So we hope to see you again at our live event. That was great. And
yeah, definitely keep me posted. That was a lot of fun. I definitely love doing it. So I'd be happy to come back.
Great. And you're on rotation virtually again too. So the baby will be walking by the time we get back to you again. But we really appreciate you taking your time out in your busy day.
Yeah, of course.
On a Friday, no less. And we just really appreciate your time, and the information that you provided was just awesome. And it was even more so. I was so glad that I asked you to come do an extended version of it here today, because we only had 15-20 minutes, and we had to digest a lot of it in such a short period of time. So this was
Yeah.
great. And I'm going to send this to the school as well, because most of the students remember you.
Oh,
And
good.
I'm going to send it to the counselor so that they can see your extended version of what you talked about.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
The
That
school.
sounds
But
awesome. Yeah, tell anyone too. Here, I'll put my email address in the chat.
all right.
And if anyone has any further questions, you can feel free to email me.
Yep. There you guys go. And this will be on YouTube, our YouTube site. I'll send you a copy as well. But you guys are probably have, usually if the Eventbrite people, if you sign up, the YouTube link is already in there. And the other students already know it by now. But we really appreciate your day, taking time out of your day again. And we hope to see you very soon. And in the meantime, if they get in touch with you, great. If usually sometimes they ask me a question to ask you, I'll do it that way. But
Yeah, that's fine too.
Okay. And other than that, you guys have a great day. And thank you guys for coming as well. Okay.
Yeah, it was great to be
All
here.
right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, guys. Have a good
Thank you.
Bye-bye.